Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hello, everybody. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. I am Alexis. We have Ray, Josh, and Brett with us today. I feel like it's been a while since we've said our name, who we are. We're just like, we know things, listen to us.
We're the regulars.
Facts, but also if you're new to this, that is who we are. And we do, in fact, know things. And so welcome to our podcast about knowing things, specifically plant things.
Thank you. Good to be here. Oh, wait, no, that's the audience.
Good. Yes. We hope
Playing the role as audience.
You guys are so cool. I'm just going to go leave a review of this podcast and say that it's great so that other friends and family can learn that it's about this great podcast.
Thank you, anonymous listener.
What Sesame Street character was that?
Me as Elmo.
Brett.
Going through puberty.
As Snuffleupagus.
You are wearing red again today, Brett.
All right. Well, we were going to talk, our plan, our idea was to talk about some container plants today, some potted plants. It's a little bit different than kind of some of the things we talk about. We usually try and relate everything we talk about onto a very commercial scale for those of our farmers in the group, all the way down to, a homeowner who may just have a tree in their yard or something like that. And I think in some ways, talking about containers definitely has a commercial aspect. So we can talk about commercial mums. We can talk about commercial hanging baskets, all kinds of stuff there. But I think we each kind of have our own personal love of some form of container plants. Brett, I know you have a very special love of one particular kind.
My endless love.
An affection, one might say.
Well, I think for me, the reason, my bias or my reason for wanting to talk about this is that, as you mentioned, the world of horticulture extends from, yes, those tomatoes in the ground, whether it be a commercial field or a home garden, but it can also be that we have a lot of folks who are living in apartments or they live in an area that they don't have access to getting stuff in the ground for one reason or another. Or there are some people, some crazy people, I'm among them, who decides to take these crazy tropical plants and try to grow them inside their house, figure out a window or a door or some way of getting light into them. And so it's just a way of acknowledging that not all horticulture in our culture is in the ground or is soil based all the time. Yeah.
Heresy.
And that's the reason. If you are growing a little pothos in your office window or your apartment window, you're engaged in, you're part of the horticulture, the culture of horticulture, as Alexis would say. And we want to acknowledge that. And also we really like it. And I have some plants that I grow in containers we can talk about later, but
I just find containers really enabling. I love the possibilities that growing things, whatever you choose to grow in containers, I think it's just really flexible and enabling, and it allows people to grow where maybe they could not grow before. That's why it's so exciting to me. No matter what life stage you're in, no matter where you're at, as long as you have a bit of sunlight, you can usually accomplish, growing in, other than mineral-based soils and some kind of growing medium, if you have access to that. And
containers have huge implications for a lot of people with other abilities, maybe some physical limitations or otherwise for one reason or another.
Absolutely.
Which is great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And certain types of big scale commercial production rely on containers, right? Like if you're selling live plants to people, it's going to come in some form of a container. So
bag culture, like even
ball and burlap. Right.
There's literally, you split a bag of potting soil open and grow a tomato in it and emptied it out of the greenhouse and go back again. Do that with thousands of bags of things. Yeah.
Right.
Commercial scale. That's a good point.
Yeah. And so it's a lot of people's first dip into horticulture, I think, is a houseplant, right? Like an African violet, a pothos, a jade plant, maybe a plant that, and they come from, I think one of my favorite parts about, you know what? I have an idea for another episode. If you think this is a good idea, people listening, leave us a review. But like
Mm.
plants that are passed down. So often the plants that you get from grandma or your great aunt or
Mhm.
are plants that are house plants. And so I think that's so fascinating. I had a woman call me the other day, and she was talking about, it was like something that her great grandfather brought over the mountains from,
Wow.
Virginia. And it's just
Mhm.
such a cool, there's a lot of history that goes into it. So
I
it's a
have
little,
one of those on my porch, Alexis, that's 4 generations old. On my
yeah,
wife's side, and I'm informed if I ever
What's the
let
plant?
that
What was
die,
the plant?
that I will be next.
no pressure.
It's a type of lily.
Oh
I have to
yeah,
go
you
back
were
and see.
telling
It's
It's an
some
me.
kind of big
like
I
orange
some
remember
one.
that
sort of
one.
amaryllis, isn't it?
Yeah,
Or is it a
it's
blood
some.
lily?
And it's not a blood lily. It's one of the big orange lilies, and I've ID'd it,
Hmm.
and I'd have to go back and look it up. But it is, I think, at least 4 generations old in her family. But yes, I cannot let anything happen to this. It's currently doing very well on the porch. Had a little mealybug infestation. We've got that under control. But the history and the
Hmm.
love that's went into, like, yeah, that's a great point, Alexis. Just generations of care went into these things, and division, and different people hopefully have shared that. So yeah, it's awesome.
So,
It's
anyways, we're very
cool.
excited. Although we all love to be outside, and I could talk all day about soil, as you probably know by now.
Dirt.
There is something. Shut your mouth. Shut your filthy mouth. There are some really cool things. I worked in a greenhouse all through undergrad, and have a love of tropical, quote unquote house plants, but just growing plants in media, which is, maybe that's a good place to start, is kind of the one of the differences, or several of the differences there are between
Mm.
growing in a pot and growing outside. And one, Ray hinted to earlier, is we're not growing in a mineral based soil, we're growing in a potting media. So who wants to, I could talk about that all the time, but I know that a lot of you have thoughts on that.
The two are very, and we've touched bases on different podcasts. If you are a consistent listener, you know that we've touched bases on this. That you can't just take a mineral based soil out of the soil column and put it in a container and expect to grow things in it, because it doesn't behave like you would want it to.
Right.
And
Yeah, it's not the
when you
case
say
at
it doesn't
all.
behave the way you want it
We're
to, what do
usually
you
talking
mean?
about, yeah, turns to concrete usually,
Yeah.
and that
Mhm.
you take it out of its native environment, not to overcomplicate things, out of the soil column, out of its ecosystem, put it into a container, and it will almost invariably turn into something that's a lot like concrete. It'll get very hard. It'll be a very inhospitable growing
No,
environment.
Yeah.
yeah,
It
So a lot of
doesn't
times
drain.
stays
It
really
doesn't
really
drain
no,
wet.
properly.
Yeah,
doesn't drain.
yeah.
It
Even if you've got
compacts.
holes in the bottom, it doesn't
Yeah.
drain properly.
Air
And
spaces go. So you can't
yeah.
do that is number one. And there's lots of artificial growing medium. I mean, everything from coconut fiber to the typical peat-based materials that we'll find at your
Mhm.
local box store. There are so many cool growing mediums out there, whether you're growing something like an orchid or a tomato, and they're customized based on the fertility needs. If it's pre-incorporated fertilizer, based on the drainage needs. If it's a desert-based plant, you can get, ones that have drainage characteristics. So really the success in containers to me is either making up or purchasing a pre-formulated mix for your container. That's the beginning and basis of
So in
everything, based
in
on your
in
goals and
field
needs
soil,
Right.
and the
in the
plant.
Yeah.
ground in your garden or whatever, the elements we're thinking about are clay, sand, silt, and loam. Those are kind of the
Silton.
Yeah,
so what are
sand,
the
silt, and
key?
clay, the big three, which are not present. That's not present in a peat-based mix at all. It's not a. In
We
fact,
call
you'll see
them
on the back soilless.
soilless
Yeah,
medias. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
and it's interesting when you bring that up to like a master gardener class or just speaking with someone. They're like, "What do you mean soilless? It's my potting
What
soil."
all
But
what
yeah, it's
all
literally
Right.
soilless.
what
There's
all's
no
in there?
actual mineral-based soil in there
In
in
some of
some
the
cases.
options.
Yeah.
Vermiculite,
What was the first
perlite,
one?
peat, lots of things. Yeah.
Can be sand. Can be like fine. Pine fines is big in like commercial industry. It's very dependent. Like I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Ray was saying, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you are trying to just fill a couple of pots to have a couple of plants, a pre-made mix is probably where you're going to want to go. But if you're, going to be filling hundreds and hundreds of containers, or you're doing something much larger scale, paying full retail on that is going to hurt your bottom line. So you have to look into kind of the raw materials that can be found and mixed together to sort of create the industry or academic term is a substrate to plant into
Mm-hmm.
that is your
Hmm.
kind of soilless media. But some of
in
those
all
things
of
can
the
be like sand, like
yeah,
peat, coconut coir, or cocoa coir.
core,
Perlite.
yeah, coconut fiber.
Perlite is the white stuff that you see.
Pumice.
It's a
Mhm.
natural media that you
I always
see in
want to get vermiculite and perlite.
Yeah.
Which one's the volcanic ash? That is
perlite.
Popcorn rock.
perlite. Yeah, I always have to think about that. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Perlite's the white stuff you see in your potting soil, and then if you see anything like a shinier substance, that's your vermiculite.
And the two do
Mhm.
different things, don't they, Alexis? Perlite does one
Yeah,
thing and vermiculite does another.
they're
Is that
both
correct?
mostly for drainage, but
Mhm.
you create different pore space with them because your vermiculite's going to be more like a flat, almost more like clay, where it's real flat and so the pore space is different versus perlite is going to have much larger pore space, a lot of aeration held in those. I know a lot about perlite because my master's research was looking at growing cucumbers in a greenhouse in soilless media.
Do you
So I
ever do
can
you ever
Right.
tell
feel
you a
like when you
lot
share
about
this
Awesome.
information
soilless
with us that
media.
it's just like perlite before swine?
Nice. You were
Every
waiting on that,
episode.
Brad.
Hmm.
Fred's thinking. I saw the
Yeah.
wheels turning. I saw
There
Don't
it.
get me
he
started. I'm
is.
gonna get heat
I
stress.
showed it today, folks.
The machine.
That's right.
Nice.
Not to
Okay.
reference old business.
Make sure you drink
Good
some water.
callback.
And so
Brett.
in those
Um,
mixes, there's kind of like organic components. That's the cocoa coir, the peat moss. I mean
Mhm.
the peat and the
Hmm.
uh it could be, pine fines, yeah. And so
Pine Fines is
well,
one that was
that
yeah.
stuff's
used and
kind of
like
like
really
holding on to some
ground
water,
up
holding on to
tight.
some nutrition. It gives, it's like
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah. Basically, it's like you're trying. One of the things that I had read was, if you're planting in a field, your drainage benefits from the fact that the capillary action, which is everything weird that water does has to do with its surface tension and that pull. And so the capillary action of what's going on further down is helping
yeah.
pull things to drain out. And in a container, you just don't have that. So you're having to kind of create a soil
This
that
is
will help move the water. Or
Hmm.
not a soil. I mean, that's where it gets a mess, right? Like potting soil. Is it really a
Substrate.
in some
soil?
cases
But yeah,
a taller
substrate.
container
That's
will
the good word.
drain
I like
quicker and dry
substrate.
quicker than a shorter container because the water column is stronger
Hmm.
on that taller container. Not, I mean, if it's small,
Hmm.
it's, a
Right,
different story,
right.
but
So
it can be. Excuse me.
if we're talking about if we're going to talk about that, I feel like I have to bring up the and I get a lot of pushback on this when I teach this. People who do containers, whatever kind of container you do, there is this mindset and that you
Oh
should put
yeah.
gravel in the bottom of your container, like a couple inches of gravel, and then you put your soil on top. And maybe it's not gravel, maybe it's big rocks, whatever. It's just some
Yeah.
some larger media, and then you put your soilless substrate, your potting mix, whatever, on top of that. And what you do is you kind of create a false
Hmm.
soil like layer there,
Yeah.
and that you actually will inhibit that soil from draining because it's going to hold in that top potting soil mixture, and it doesn't want to drain into that large porous area of gravel or whatever it is you put there. And so you can actually have root rot even though you are trying to have good drainage happening.
Yep.
The opposite effect can happen. And I get a lot of pushback from people who are like, I've
Yeah.
always done this. And I always tell people, if you've done it and things are good and they're surviving, then that works for you. Maybe the way you water or wherever you keep it, that works. Do what you're going to do. But if you're new to this or you've been having trouble with this, it's because you're in a pot. It's very important to
Hmm.
have a consistency of
Mhm.
whatever media you are using the entire way through, because you will cause a lot of
Yeah, it's almost
problems
it's
with your
almost like
drainage.
Right.
the old
I,
school firefighter bucket brigade, where you're handing water from one person to another, and everybody's evenly spaced, and you can reach it, they can reach it,
Yeah.
and then at the end of the line, the people have like 20 feet between them, and then you can't hand that water off to the next person because there's
right.
Hmm.
Or you're all of a sudden
yeah,
reaching the bucket to someone that's
exactly,
8 feet
it just
tall, so
creates
you're
a
Yeah.
reaching,
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
differential, yeah.
fidget.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I had seen it. You had mentioned this before, and people kind of bringing this up, and it not being best practice. But I've seen gravel use, but in a double potting system. right?
Mm.
To where like they
Mhm.
have a really nice container that doesn't have holes or something
Mhm.
like that, but is very
Mm-hmm.
aesthetically pleasing, and they'll line the bottom of that with
Yes.
gravel. But then the plant truly
There's
is
just a
in a
drainage hole.
completely separate container
Mm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
then inside that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
And that, I'm wondering how much of it is people who have
I think it
seen
just
something like
makes
that and
Mm.
then not
it
realizing
feels
that
like
the middle
it makes
container
common
is
sense, and it's one of those
crucial.
things that it's not actually true, but it
Mhm.
feels like it would be.
Yeah,
Well,
that's where
Right.
I think
I know,
is.
and yeah, that it defies logic. And what about get you guys take on like larger containers? Like let's take a stock tank because I've seen this a lot. They're really deep, and to fill that thing up with, let's just say, prepared potting mix would cost
Mhm.
$1,000 or more. Cost a lot of money, and there are methods. If it's larger, can you kind of use a little bit of bottom fill? If it's a much larger container, because don't the physics change a little bit there?
Like if
So
it's
Can
deep enough, you're saying,
Yeah,
or
if it's deep enough.
the for something like a stock tank that's only going to be 2 foot, maybe 3 foot high. I don't.
Hmm.
I'm sure the physics do change. I'm not a
Oh,
physicist. I'm a
Yeah,
horticulturist,
I don't.
but there's two things that I will recommend for that, which don't and do the thing that we're talking about with the gravel and do that drainage inhibition. But so one is just to fill it with like a solid substance. So like, as an example, you take buckets, old buckets that have holes in them, or you don't use them anymore. Heck, I've used like old stock tanks that I can't fill
Mm,
with anything, and I flip them upside down. And so then what I get is kind of like a shallow bottom, or a
Mhm.
false bottom on there. And so I still get the
yeah.
benefit of having a
So you're
really
putting a
tall,
bottom in
shimming it
basically.
up.
However you can
right,
accomplish getting a bottom in
right.
there. Yeah, I got you.
The other way is that you have a
Mhm.
slower transition. So if we go back to the, visual of the bucket brigade, okay, you have all the short people, those are your media, and then you gradually get taller. So in this case it would be you gradually increase the size, so you don't go from someone who's 5 foot tall to someone 8 foot tall. You do 5 foot tall, then 6 foot tall, then 7 foot, and then eight
So
foot is your big
your
gravel pieces at the
aggregate gets
bottom. And so you kind
gradually
of
bigger
create.
through the column. It's not like
Correct, right. You don't
little
go from one
big.
extreme to the other.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Because
nice
everybody
smooth
tries to
gradient.
save money. Everybody tries to. I mean, if you have ever tried to fill up a 4x8,
Oh yeah.
12 inches
Boy,
deep
have I.
potting
No, I'm
soil,
just
you
kidding.
have.
I haven't.
Oh
Mm,
man, Brett. Yeah.
Story of my life.
I know we had a grant
I have.
last year, and it was a couple $1,000s, and we had a community garden. They said, "Oh, we're going to fill these boxes up," and they had like 6 or 8 4x8 boxes. It did about 3 of the 6 or 8,
Hmm.
and it ate a couple $1,000s worth of potting soil so quickly. And there's lots of great calculators you can go online and just put in keywords extension service, raised bed container calculator, and that'll tell you how many cubic feet or whatever of mix you need to go into these things. Well, and then so I went through that with this community group. I said, this is going to take a lot of substrate. Josh, there you go. There's your word. It's going to
Mhm.
take a lot of mix in there, and so everybody's trying to save money.
Yeah,
Trying to save
it's
money.
what's difficult is the people who have this figured out down to like a science, right? Of
Hmm.
what is the most profitable way to make this in bulk. That is like one of their operating trade secrets. I mean, like
Hmm.
Absolutely.
I've been able to tour some really large container nurseries. Like I went to one up in Oregon for well, I won't say the name of the company, but they were huge, right? We're talking like several hundred acres
Rhymed
of
with
container plants,
orange.
and they have a lot of stuff,
Mhm.
and they have like a very involved process for bringing in pine fines, and they have their own in-house like kind of composting system and different aggregates. I mean, they order
Hmm.
all these like bulk materials, and they'll talk about the mix in broad strokes, but what it all comes down to and their fertilizer is like they're not going to tell us about that
Hmm.
No.
because that's like that's a way to protect their margins,
Hmm.
so
Well,
it's
a lot of these materials aren't even sustainable. So
yeah,
and that's why I guess is one of the motivations for introducing core fiber a long time
yeah,
ago is it's a more sustainable product, a substrate that
right.
goes in there. But like peat mud, like you don't make peat.
Right. Yeah.
It takes a few
You
years to make
essentially
that.
like
Yeah.
we extract peat a lot faster than it comes in, whereas like
Yes.
cocoa core is a byproduct of these large coconut plantations, and there's tons of it. It ships very easy. It's compressed. There's a little bit of an issue in because a lot of these things like peat's the same way. If it's completely dried out, it takes a long time to be able to get water to
Rehydrate.
adhere to it again. Yeah. And cocoa, of course, the same way. And so when it's shipped totally dry, there's like a brick of this stuff that can turn into a ton of it, but it takes some processing. And it's a little difficult because, the logistical network isn't there yet to deliver, bulk cocoa
I
coir
just
everywhere in the
recently had my
US.
first
Yeah,
experience
sure.
with cocoa coir and bought it. That's COIR for those googling at home. And they ship it to you in this little brick that you
Yes.
can rehydrate, and it fluffs out, and you can get them off of consumer websites. Like, it's not like a
Yep.
just an industry thing. So
Hmm.
so we've kind of launched out into
Right.
the bigger. If we pull back to the little smaller, and we think about those folks in apartments or with a patio or a little space,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe focusing on the container gardening side. Okay, so looking at
Hmm.
my agent colleagues here, somebody comes in and they're like, I want to try container gardening. What do you want them to have on their list, their shopping list, to go and pick up? Maybe let's say 3 different plants.
Probably not corn. I'm just going to go there. And that's the first discussion I have is, well, what
Yeah.
do you want? Is it ornamental? Is it edible? And if it's edible, what is your family going to eat? We try to reconcile that with what we know will do well given the space that they have and how big of a container. There's a
Mm-hmm.
big difference between
Yeah.
a box and a
Hmm.
individual 5-gallon container.
So,
That's where I usually start.
so
Is
if
what
I'm
is
a,
appropriate and does well in
I'll play
any
the
given
role
size.
here. So I'm a little container. I don't have much space. The patio does get some sun. We really like tomatoes,
Hmm.
and we'd love to do something else, but we're not really sure what we want to do yet. Do you have any, good options for a container garden?
Well, if you like tomatoes, I usually start with a determinant, something like a patio. Specifically, it'll say tags are pretty good, seed tags and even tags when you go to buy them. They sell out very quickly, so you have to go early in the season. But look for patio tomatoes, smaller varieties. They grow to a point in height and stop. But if you like tomatoes, you probably are going to like peppers because that's in salsa also. Bell peppers and things like that are great, plants
And what
to
kind of
have
container
in
am I looking for?
containers. That's some really
What kind of
that's
Yeah.
the two
container
most
might I be
common
looking
ones I
for?
see. What's that? Tomato, one of my minimum just rule of thumb sizes for a tomato is a little bit larger. That's more like a 8 to 10 gallon I like to have. I know you can
Sure.
do it in a 5-gallon container, but it's a little bit more difficult. So a little bit
Hmm.
larger container for
Okay.
tomatoes. Peppers about half that. 5-gallon
Yeah.
works just fine. 5 to 8 on peppers.
So if you're doing something
Hmm.
smaller, like let's just say like a
Yeah.
window box size, because that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
I think a size people can
Yeah.
identify with. I really love leaf
Mm.
lettuce
Oh
in
yeah.
a container. So a
Microgreens.
cut,
Yeah.
and we're talking more about a
Mm.
cut and come again type, like
Not a
a
head
leaf lettuce, like
lettuce.
the kind that you
Not a
buy
head
cut and
lettuce.
just like a
Not like a
right, not a
bib,
head,
but a
Right.
not
Right.
leaf. Yeah.
iceberg, not romaine, well, leaf lettuce. And so this is something that you can go out with a pair of scissors and you can cut, and it's going to refresh itself. If you've got a shady area that you can keep it in, it will last longer throughout the summer because lettuce is going to be a cool season crop, which means you can start getting some of that earlier in the year. So it does really well. If you have a pot that's a little bit deeper, like a little bit of a taller pot, but it doesn't have to be large, you can do something like carrots, you can do radishes. Radishes are, if you are struggling with I feel like I talk about radishes a lot, but I've been growing them this year and they're just on my mind. But like they're so
Hmm.
easy and they're so fast. So if you really need a
Yeah.
confidence booster, you can have radish harvest in a month.
Hmm.
From the
I
time you
kind of
put
feel that
them
way about
on the
onions
seed.
too, like green
Yeah,
onions. Yeah.
it's
Hmm.
just they're a good confidence booster. So if you really want, or if you've got kids involved, and they really kind of need, I mean, it's not instant satisfaction, but something to kind of keep them motivated. You can
Hmm.
see those radishes growing and you're harvesting in a month, so you can really see from week to week the differences that they
Yeah.
make. But even carrots will do well if you have something a little bit of a deeper container. Sometimes you have those ones that are tall and skinny, and those
Hmm.
And
carrots will
all of
do
those,
just
you're
fine in
just
that. But
you're
leaf lettuce
putting
is
seeds. You're
definitely
direct seeding. You're not having don't have to have
mhm,
transplants for that. You can just kind of
you can
sprinkle the
direct seed
seeds and cover
those.
them up.
Right. So it's
And
a
in that
really
Yeah.
cheap
case,
option too.
what am I
So
filling my
you
window
don't.
box with as far as media?
So I'd recommend just like a regular old potting soil, nothing fancy. You can buy the cheapest potting soil you can find, and that will be fine. That's usually
You
the
kind of
best
have
way
to
to
pay
go.
attention a little bit depending on what you're growing. If you're growing something like a microgreen that takes very little soil, you can even grow those on mats. But you have to kind of pay attention because a lot of the formulations I've noticed the last 10 years, they want to pre-incorporate because they can charge more. They want to pre-incorporate fertilizer. That is something very good to know. If it's
Mm,
pre-charged with a fertility
yes.
Yeah.
mix, very good to know because fertility is something that's incredibly hard to control in containers anyways because of the frequency of watering, and you just don't have the medium just doesn't hold fertility like a mineral based soil. But it is good to know that if there's fertilizer up front, because that will feed. If it says 3 months, it's probably going to feed much less than that. But that's a good fact to know,
Yeah.
Like old lettuce,
like
For
like
what
old
Alexis
is
lettuce
said,
box Sheffield
for
said.
lettuce and things like that. Yeah, Alexis,
Yeah.
a lettuce.
a
My
lettuce?
recom-
A lettuce.
yeah, my recommendation for like a smaller box. I'm kind of a bang for the buck sort of guy, so I always like to recommend and fantasize. I started with culinary herbs specifically. Like
Mm-hmm.
I really like onion chives. I think a
Oh
cool
yeah,
mix
those are
would be
great.
like onion chives, maybe like thyme,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll do well in kind of a small
Basil is
space. Yeah,
Cilantro
great.
does
basil's
well.
good. Yeah.
Basil works awesome. You
And
know,
you
you
know, like that's a way you can really, if you're
Spinach.
having to buy, having access to fresh herbs really takes the game up, and it can save a
yeah.
lot of money. Because I mean, if you're going to the store and you're buying like quote unquote fresh herbs, they're weeks old and they're very expensive. But if you're pulling them right off the plant and into the pot that you're cooking in or the pan, then
Mm-hmm.
I also
it's
like herbs in
huge.
containers because you can control them a little better.
Hmm.
Certain herbs like to get loose in the garden.
Sure, like a
Uh,
little mint or
yeah,
something.
oh, mint. I'm looking at you, mint. Um, what else? I mean, you can even go outside, even in small containers now. You can like Bushmaster cucumbers or the bush top cucumbers. You can even grow cucumbers very well in very small containers. They have a
Mhm.
very limited root system, and they don't grow. It'll say 2 to 3 feet vines, and they'll go 2 to 3 feet. They don't vine like a traditional cucumber. So variety selection is really important in containers. Whether it's a tomato, you don't want a big boy tomato generally in a container unless it's huge because they're just going to grow and topple your container. The same
Mhm.
goes for cucumbers and things like that. There are plants, peppers included, just lots of garden crops that have been developed just for containers, and
Mhm.
those tend
I
to
think
do
another
better.
thing,
They
just as
do
far
they
as the
they do
container
much better.
gardening that I'd like to throw out is the, beauty is truth and truth beauty. That's all on earth, and vegetables are cool too. I think someone famous said that once. But there's a lot of flowers that you can do in containers. We actually have a blend. We do a lot of stuff in the ground, obviously, I've talked about, but we also have a lot of container accent plants and little, and you can get a cool container that looks cool that is part of the design. And if you're on a patio or you just have a little patio area, or you don't want to get into the ground growing game, we have like we do like petunias and geraniums and coleus, and there's a lot of different options of stuff, especially in the annual side of things, where you can just put, and it's amazing. We have this little row of pots of petunias on the side of our driveway that the I built this little kind of stand thing that obscures this really gross asphalt job that these people did previous to us living here. And it's amazing just walking out and seeing that little accent of color, that pop of color, and just like, I don't know, it
Mm-hmm.
just feels so welcoming, and it has a tangible positive influence on my day. And it's just a container. It's nothing crazy. And like you said, it's cheap potting soil,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of a time release fertilizer that, because it didn't, the
Mhm.
one stuff we had didn't have it.
Mhm.
And that it's even if that's all we had, that is like a remarkable little accent piece that works really well. And I think people, going out on that patio, and maybe it makes you want to spend a little more time outside and get a little bit more vitamin D. And it
Mm-hmm.
just,
Softens it up.
I'm
Yeah.
constantly amazed at how those little touches can just drastically improve. And it's the same way when I get a bouquet from Alexis or from the Bel Air Blooms or any of the other growers. It's just like, man, that is just so much, like, it's just better. it's just better. It just
It
and
softens the
it's
space, doesn't it?
Yeah,
ephemeral,
it
and there's
does.
some sort of reflection there. But at the very base level, yeah, it softens and brightens the space, and that's another way you can use containers.
And when we're talking about, containers, whether no matter what you're talking about, I don't care if you're talking about houseplants or whatever, but a lot of the time people are doing this combination, putting multiple plant types of plants into one
Yeah,
uh,
mhm.
one container, and they do that a lot in that annual flower production. And so one thing I see, and I see this at box stores, so like big businesses created these, big know better than to do this type places do this, but they'll
Yeah.
combine what I consider a shade plant with a full sun plant. And so make sure that if you're making your own container, you know where you're going to put it. First of all, I'm going to put it right over here in this corner, and it's hot at 4 o'clock and full sun on it. It's a full sun area. Only choose full sun plants. You're going to get the most success out of that. But if it's in a shady area, don't put a plant that likes a lot of sun in that shady area, or mix it in, because what's going to happen is the somebody's going to beat somebody else out, right? So if you're in a shady area, the shady plants are going to beat out the sun plants because they're going to be much happier and healthier. And you're also not going to get as many blooms because that plant, we've talked about, heat stress and drought stress before. And so ties that in, that plant is going to be more
Hmm.
stressed because it's not in the ideal situation. So just kind of think of that if you're the one, making that or buying that plant, make sure that it's suitable for where you're going to
Yeah,
put it, even if it's in
definitely.
a container.
Brett mentioned something that's really, really super important, I think, in containers. One of the most important things to me. You mentioned slow release fertilizer, but that's something that becomes much more important in containers because you're watering so much more often. You're just flushing all the time. A lot of times in a container, much more often in a substrate, as we mentioned, doesn't hold nutrients very well. So your slow release fertilizers are a good option in a lot of cases, not all cases, but a lot of cases, because it sort of buffers the release somewhat. The thing
Mm-hmm.
to keep in mind about those timed release fertilizers is a lot of those that have a specialized coating that sort of holds under the fertilizer and it slowly releases as you water. A lot of those will say they'll feed 2 to 3 months,
Yeah.
but that's based on 70 degrees. If
Right.
we're in a warmer temperatures than that, that's going to be more
Yeah.
like 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So remember that. You just don't add a coated fertilizer and think it's going to last that long if we're in the summer in Kentucky. And our last episode, we talked about heat stress. We get hot here in Kentucky sometimes. Just know that fertilizer is going to go out into the plants much faster than if it were cooler. So but I still think it's a great option. Slow
Yeah.
release fertilizers, because every time you water, you're going to give that plant a little dose of that. And micro dosing is much more important in containers
Mm-hmm.
to provide a constant feed of fertilizer. And even knowing that, it's really difficult when you grow something like a tomato in a container. It's really difficult not to have blossom end rot and other nutrient deficiencies. Super tough unless you have a lot of experience. It's just tough. So I think fertilizer is important. You generally have to fertilize more than you think,
Mm-hmm.
particularly when you're growing vegetables in containers. Is that true for flowers also, or what's the? I think people are more accustomed to
Mm-hmm.
using fertilizer on flowers in containers. It seems like the ones I've worked with.
Well, I think we've like roundabout said this, but not directly said this. You when you grow a plant in a container, no matter what it is,
Yeah.
you give it everything, right? There's no buffering there. So other than if you're lucky enough that it rains and your container is an area that can get rain, there's no buffering. So when we have soil, we have buffering for heat, we have buffering for water, nutrient availability. We have that naturally in the soil when we're planting there. We
Mhm.
don't have any of that, and you have essentially a sterile environment. So you have to give that plant everything that it needs. That being said, talking about medias and those substrates and fertilizer, personally, this is a personal preference and just something I've learned over the years growing all types of container plants, is I don't like to start with a media that has a fertilizer in it. So a lot of the time, those of us who are doing potted plants, we're not doing just one type of plant. When you're doing small, you might be potting up this plant for tomatoes, but over here you're going to do your petunias, but you also have some pothos and jade inside. So you're going to use that same bag for a lot of stuff. All those plants have different nutrient recommendations. They have different areas they're going to be. Some are annual, some are more like a perennial. So that in itself says I don't need that. It's also a lot more expensive to buy it, like fertilizer in that bag. It
Mhm.
might not seem that way, but when you kind of think about it, then
Yeah.
buying your fertilizer, whether that's slow release or whether that's just something like a Miracle Grow that you're going to, have mixed up or on the end of your hose and apply every time you water. And so it's a lot more expensive in the long run. And also, it's not the best for everything. And so you can fine tune your fertilizers if you are the one applying it based on the size of your container and all of that jazz. So my recommendation to you would be not to buy any fertilizer with a starter in it, and especially true if you're going to grow something with seeds. So I do not recommend any fertilizer when you're first starting seeds. It can cause some damage to those really young plants. They don't need fertilizer when they're first coming
Right.
out of that seed, and so you're going to waste a lot of that fertilizer or potentially damage those young seedlings by having it too early. So don't waste your money is my
Yeah, I found
recommendation.
it's gotten a little bit harder for me to find non-charger starter media at box stores.
Hmm.
Mm.
And I even had to like
Mm.
Yeah.
contact
It is
one of the
getting more difficult.
manufacturers because it wasn't immediately apparent whether there was
Wow.
or wasn't, and there was.
Hmm.
And it's
Mm.
just,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. One thing, if you're not sure, fun fact, anything that has fertilizer in it will have the three numbers on it for nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. So you don't, if you're just looking whether or not it has some, because I agree with you, Brett. I have looked sometimes and been like, is this got a fertilizer in it or not? Like it's hard to find, but it will always, because it's law, will have the percentage of fertilizer in it on there. So you'll just see three numbers. So it might say 10-10-10, or it might say just 0.2-0.1. I mean, it might
Right.
be very, very minimal, but it will always have that. So if you see those three numbers separated by dashes, you don't need to look any further. It's
Yeah.
got fertilizer in it. So sometimes it's really difficult to find
And if you're just
like
getting
what's going
started,
on.
don't get too worked up about any of this.
Yeah.
Just buy something that looks good, throw a plant in it, and try. But if you're like us, the one plant will suddenly become many, many more,
Yeah.
and you want to get more specialized, and you want them all to do well, and it just kind of
Yeah. Not only will the plants multiply, but so will your ambitions.
Yeah.
runaway train.
Uh, I'm trying to justify my addiction here. If you look out back, I have multiple things in containers. And I'm so excited, you guys, about, we've talked a little bit about containers, but these soft containers that
Mm.
you can get at online order
I haven't tried
sources, have
any.
you guys gotten into those and tried any of those?
Like
They, you,
bags and stuff like that, like
yes, like the fiber
the
bags.
fiber
Like
bags.
they
Yeah,
degrade, right? Okay.
I've
Yeah.
been using those for a lot of projects here the last 2 or 3 years, and I know the quality varies a lot with those, but so excited over stuff like that. And I love them so much. I'm even using them at home in place of I was getting like used nursery containers. I'd go and source and spec
Mm-hmm.
and buy for a few
Hmm.
bucks. Used containers, clean them up good. But now I've switched over using 10-gallon grow bags, and they've worked exceedingly well. I don't know how long they're going to last, but I guess
Mm.
container technology is one of those things that has come along too. And they're
Hmm.
lightweight. They can ship you 5 in a pack that's vacuum packed, and they're a little 2-inch by 6-inch container, tiny. And here you've got 5 10-gallon containers that come in this tiny little package. And it's
Hmm.
amazing. I know they've been used in other countries for a long time and they've been used commercially, but pretty excited about that becoming more prevalent with homeowners. We've used it, as I said, a lot in the county as demos, and people are just blown away. And they have handles. You have to kind of be careful because when you wet down potting soil or your substrate mix, it can get really heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But you can still move them around. It's pretty amazing
Well, can
at
we?
the containers for that. So yeah,
Do
container
you think
tech
we
is
can
one thing
do a
that's come along
little
too.
brief primer, key differences, etc., for houseplants, and maybe leave it open? We'll talk very briefly about them, and then if folks want a full length episode on the houseplant vibe, we can do that. Yeah, we
Yeah, I love houseplants.
Alexis all of a sudden got excited. I wish you could see it.
Yeah. So I feel free to guide this because I
yeah, that's
could
enough.
talk
That's enough.
about all kinds of
No,
stuff, but I would say like, and cut her off, cut her off.
And
thank
wrap
you,
it
I
up.
will say,
Alexis.
Alexis,
Cutter Mike.
my Master Gardener group a few years back
Somebody
said you were
mute
the
her.
only person that ever made indoor plants fun. I
Aw.
had a
I'm
Master Gardener group tell me that. They said
really.
Alexis was the only one that ever made indoor plants the presentation worth it. They were like, no, that was actually good. We're surprised.
Oh, that's
But
saying
that was
something because
Alexis. That was Alexis.
I
She was very passionate.
I like talked at them for like 2 straight hours, so
She
that's
They
filibustered.
loved
surprising.
it. And I was like, why are they listening? This is indoor plants. This is something we don't really do. Yeah, but they loved it. Good stuff.
Well, like I kind of mentioned before, so all through undergrad, I worked in the research greenhouses on campus, and they were the houses that
And
they
if
used
you're
for like demonstration and all the classes
if you're
came
trying
to
to
be used. So
find
there was
them,
just a
they're
big
actually
collection
clear.
of
They're not green. That common mistake. They're actually they should call them clear houses.
yes, yeah, common mistake, common mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, you can
sometimes. If it's
see
not like
green
chalky
through
or whatever
them,
that
though. So
is. Yeah.
I mean, hopefully, if you're doing it right, right. But anyways, the whole collection. So everything from desert plants to the deep jungle type plants, and so kind of got a full spectrum. And one thing, like we've already talked about media, but like I can't stress this enough, is knowing. I tell everybody when they say houseplants, my favorite thing that people say is I have a brown thumb. I can't grow a cactus. I killed a cactus. Someone said that to me the other day, and I said, "Girl, where are cactuses from?"
Lotus.
And she said, "The desert." And I said, "And is your house the desert?" And she goes, "No." And I said, "There you go." So when you're thinking about houseplants, if you have one, if you want to go buy one, the thing I always lead off with is, where is that plant from and how can you best recreate that environment? Some plants are more adaptable than others, so that's why we say pothos and jade are some of the easiest ones to do because they are just so adaptable to dry, humid, wet, cold, whatever situations. But then you've got other plants that are going to be much more particular about their humidity levels, and with houseplants it's a big deal. Their watering schedule, usually our houseplants die by overwatering more than underwatering. As an example, I water my houseplants at most twice a month. So if you're watering every week, it's probably too much if they're still inside. But there's this whole thought process, and that is the thing that has helped me the most is, where is this plant native to? It's a quick Google search will help you. If it's native to the jungle, it probably needs high humidity. If it's native to the desert, put it by your heat register where there's going to be lots of dry air, and somewhere with a south facing window because it's going to need some light. And that's like the best advice I can give you for house
What about,
plants.
are there different media considerations there?
Yeah, and Brett, with your knowledge in bonsais, you can talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, like, so if you've got succulent type plants, so like string of pearls is one that everybody loves and everybody kills, and I am here to tell you that I have had my string of pearls now for
You didn't
like
have to
5
flex on them like
years.
that. You
So
did not have to
I
flex
think I
on
know what
them
I'm
like
talking
that.
about. I am flexing so
That's a
hard.
plant flex. In case you missed it.
It's and by the way, did I mention it's a
Not just slightly,
variegated
Garrett.
string
It's
of
very,
pearls?
very
If you know,
Garrett.
you know.
Very
If you know,
good.
you know. And I also have a tricolor string of hearts that I've kept alive for 2 years now.
Dang.
So if you know, you know. But what I've learned with those is that they tend to, we get rot on them. Most of the time people kill them because they rot. And then they see them rotting and they stop watering them because they don't want them to rot, and then they don't water them
Like you're
enough,
talking about
and then they dry
root
out.
rot,
So it's
or?
kind of a 2-step. Root rots, yep. So they just they rot right out. And I was using regular potting soil that I use with all of my house plants, but I'm using that potting soil, just plain old bag of potting soil, the cheapest I can find at a box store, nothing fancy. All my other house plants do great. Cannot keep these more fleshy, succulent plants alive. So what I ended up doing is cutting that soil, that potting soil media, and I added more perlite to it. And we talked about perlite earlier. It's that white substance. And so that creates more pore space in there. And so what I found was these succulent plants, they're not true cacti, but they're not really, tropicals either. They like a lot of water, but they don't want that water to stick around very long. And so I needed some to be able to water them pretty consistently, but that water to drain away relatively fast. So I just added more perlite into that mixture and we got good drainage. Now the opposite might be true if you're, well, not really even the opposite, but like orchids. Orchids are a great example. There's a specific orchid mix that you can buy.
Mm-hmm.
You can also make your own, but it's bark, because orchids are epiphytes, which means they literally live on the outside of trees and they hang out and they just catch a bunch of leaf litter and they decompose that as they latch onto the side of a tree. So we want to mimic that, and so we use this woodier substance. There's lots of air that surrounds that root system. Brett, what's your experience with bonsais? Because I know bonsais.
Well,
are like
your
super
comment about the balancing the drainage with the water desire of the plant, there you kind of manage you manage your media depending on, or you choose your media based on how much water you want to have stick around. But in general with bonsai, like
Yeah.
the drainage is the name of the game, because the smaller the container gets, the harder it is to get oxygen into the container down at the roots, and the easier it is for water to pool. And so there's all kinds of specialty components, but a lot of like a traditional bonsai mix would include pumice, lava rock, and not lava. Well, not if
lava.
you want it to be a long-term practice. It'd be an exciting replanting season. And then this thing called akadama, which is a hard clay, pelletized clay that eventually breaks down into a clay type substrate over time, and that's it. There's no organic material at all. And so it really does start to approach something more analogous. And there's like all kinds of variations on that. Some people do 100% akadama on like more things that want more water, and they'll do higher proportions of other things for things that are drier.
Yeah.
But essentially you're starting to move toward almost like a hydroponic system where it's just water flow and nutrient, like little micro doses of nutrients, or there's a lot there. But yeah, it's a very similar thing where you kind of you want the water to not stick around too long, because root rot is a major problem in those systems.
I always wondered why that was so, like, why it seemed like there was nothing that held water, or not really in comparison to what we normally think with bonsai. And so that makes a lot of sense. You took my words and
I think in general, like you mentioned the containerized environment in general, that whether that be with outdoor plants, indoor plants, any bonsai, any number of different combinations, when you have total control over that environment, which you do in that case, especially if it's inside, like a houseplant inside. Most of my bonsai stay outside year round, or all of mine do. But when you dump a bunch of water into that container repeatedly, you are controlling the environment in a not so good way. And you're drowning it. You're creating opportunities essentially for the roots to not have enough oxygen, and then they start to die and decay, and the bacteria and other microflora take over and start to kill it. And so that overwatering, I think, is a big problem in most containerized environments in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Here's a thought I just had. Do you think people who like to feel power have a lot of containerized plants? Because you have all of the power at some point, and it's like, can you tell a person who does not have a lot of power in other ways of their life by the amount of container plants that
I feel that my container plants make me humble. I have just the opposite of, they have the opposite effect on me.
From Alexis.
Yeah.
You crave the great power, or you fear the great responsibility.
When they die. Yes. With great power comes great responsibility.
Keep your plants alive, people.
Well, yeah, maybe that's a good place to summarize this and kind of wrap things up. Containerized plants, there's a lot going on. I mean, ranging from kind of indoor plants and outdoor plants, basically house plants for people who have space limitations, or maybe they just have a porch to work with, something like that. Or maybe they're looking to grow exotics, things that are not really conducive to the environment that exists outside. Ranging all the way to kind of container production and people who are growing plants for commercial reasons, but to sell those live plants and needing to grow them and deliver them or sell them in a container. We talked about the needs. I mean, it's something we kind of couldn't get away from is how water behaves in those container
Mhm.
environments and the critical component of what you are putting in the container and what is it made out of. If you're just doing something small, working with a pre-mix that you can buy at a big box store is going to be fine. If you are needing to fill many containers, you're probably going to have to kind of construct something out of a mix of different components and what's available. And in a small container, you can grow a lot. You can grow spinach, you can grow chives, you can grow thyme, you can grow basil, you can grow lettuce. There's a lot of different things you can grow in those small things, as well as you can grow things that are simply attractive, like flowers, and some of those special ones, like things that grow in tree bark. Orchids, pretty wild, but or you can go really over the edge and get into bonsai production like
Over
Brett.
the edge. Can go cray.
Yeah, you can completely
You
Join
lose
can
your
really
us.
have
mind.
some power struggles.
you can
And
you can answer the question, how can I make a plant so
Exactly right.
dependent on me?
one resource that we forgot to mention that might be good for those of you who are wanting to do container vegetable or herb gardening that we have is the Home Vegetable Gardening in Kentucky booklet. And so this is something that you can get at any of your Kentucky Extension offices. We'll have copies for you, but you can also look it up online if you're the kind of person who just wants to be able to read it online at any time. An easy way to look this up is by typing in the letter I, D as in dog, dash 128, and then put UKY behind it. So we call that in the
In the
Ray and I
biz.
would be like, oh yeah, ID 128. So that's that's what we call it. But it is the Home Vegetable Gardening Guide in Kentucky. That's what it's called. And so there's a whole table in there that says, okay, tomato needs this size container. This is when you plant it. Lettuce needs this size container, and this is when you plant it. So it's kind of a foolproof way to get started if you're wanting to do containers for vegetables or herbs specifically. So just kind of wanted to throw that one out there. And then, of course, like we've started doing, leave us a review. So we would appreciate that. That makes the algorithm happy and makes more plant people be able to find us. So please do that, or share if you think somebody would like this episode. Please share this with them. We would love to reach more people, and hopefully you're enjoying it. You can also contact us. Our contact information is in the show notes, and so if you would like, please let us know what you want to listen to. So we kind of hit on two more specific things, houseplants and bonsai in this episode. So if you want to hear a whole episode on one of those, please let us know. Obviously, I would love to talk about houseplants, and I'm sure Brett would love to talk about bonsai, and I would love to hear about them. So, but we want to do what maybe is for you all, and we know those are very specific. We kind of
This
usually
pod is
cover
for
a
the
lot of
people.
more broad topics. This pod is for the people, for our plant peeps, right?
Shout out to
Our
the
true
true leaves.
leaves out there, as we fondly refer to them as. Shout out to you all. So please leave us a review, shoot us a message. You can follow us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast, and you can let us know on there if there's any cool ideas that you have. But I believe that is it for the day. In July, we're going to be talking about cut flowers because it is Kentucky Cut Flower Month. So we're very proud of that. Obviously, I'm very excited. So hopefully, we're going to have some cool guests on here to talk with you guys about some cut flowers and some special episodes. But anyways, as we grow this podcast, we hope that you will grow with us, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much.